When Jake Mercer watched a girl of maybe 10 years old drop her phone for the third time in 5 minutes outside a busy rest stop on Interstate 40 near Amarillo, Texas, most people would have assumed she was clumsy or distracted. But Jake had spent 22 years as a detective with the Dallas Police Department before retiring to ride full-time with the Lone Star Brotherhood Motorcycle Club, and he knew the difference between accidents and signals. The way she bent down each time to pick up the phone, the way her eyes swept the parking lot as if searching for someone who might notice, the way her hands trembled even though the September afternoon was warm and still. All of it told him that this girl was not dropping her phone by accident. She was trying to get someone's attention without alerting the woman standing 3 feet away, the woman who claimed to be her aunt, but whose body language screamed control and threat. What Jake did in the next 8 minutes would expose a custody violation that had crossed 3 state lines, trigger a multi-agency response involving the Texas Rangers and FBI, and prove that sometimes the smallest repeated gesture is the loudest cry for help. The Loves Travel. Stop just west of Amarillo sat at the intersection of Interstate 40 and Farm Road 2381. One of those sprawling complexes with diesel pumps for truckers, fast food restaurants inside, a convenience store that sold everything from beef jerky to phone chargers, and a parking lot big enough to hold 50 cars and a dozen 18-wheelers. It was 3:15 on a Friday afternoon in mid-September, the kind of day where the Texas Panhandle stretched flat and golden under an endless blue sky, where the wind carried the smell of dust and diesel, and where families on road trips stopped to refuel, stretch their legs, and grab snacks before pushing on toward New Mexico or Oklahoma. Jake Mercer had pulled his Road King into one of the motorcycle spots near the entrance, grateful for the chance to get off the bike after 2 hours of highway riding. He was 54 years old, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a steel gray beard that reached his collarbone and arms covered in tattoos that told the story of a life lived hard but lived right. The patches on his black leather vest marked him as road captain of the Lone Star Brotherhood, a club that had been riding together for 18 years, known throughout Texas for their veteran support programs, their charity rides for children's hospitals, and their absolute refusal to tolerate injustice when they witnessed it. Jake had been heading to Albuquerque for a club gathering when his bike started running a little rough, and he figured a rest stop was as good a place as any to check things out and grab a coffee. He was standing beside his bike, inspecting the engine, when he first noticed them. A woman in her late 30s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the fact that they were standing in shade, designer jeans and a crisp white blouse that looked expensive. Beside her stood a girl, maybe 10 years old, with long brown hair that hung limply around her shoulders, wearing a faded purple hoodie that was too warm for the weather, jeans with a small tear at the knee, and sneakers that looked like they had been white once, but were now grayish and scuffed. The girl's face was pale, her expression blank in that particular way that children develop when they are trying very hard not to show what they are feeling. The woman was on her phone, pacing back and forth near a silver SUV with New Mexico plates, her voice rising and falling in a conversation that sounded tense even from 20 feet away. The girl stood very still beside the vehicle, her own phone clutched in both hands, staring down at the screen with an intensity that seemed forced, like she was pretending to be absorbed in something to avoid interacting with the woman. Jake went back to checking his engine, but something kept pulling his attention back to them. It was not anything dramatic, not any single action that screamed danger, but a collection of small details that did not quite fit together. The woman never looked at the girl, never checked on her, never spoke to her directly. The girl never moved closer to the woman, never sought comfort or connection the way children usually do with family members. There was a strange distance between them, a lack of the casual intimacy that should exist between an aunt and niece or any adult and child traveling together. And then the girl dropped her phone. It clattered onto the pavement with that distinctive plastic-on-concrete sound, skittering a few inches away from her feet. She bent down slowly, picked it up, straightened, and resumed her frozen stance. The woman did not react, did not turn around, did not seem to notice at all. Jake watched for another minute, then went back to his bike. But 30 seconds later, he heard it again. The same sound, plastic hitting pavement. He looked up and saw the girl bending down to retrieve her phone once more, her movements deliberate and careful. She straightened, held the phone in both hands again, and her eyes swept across the parking lot in a slow, searching arc, looking for something. Or someone. Jake felt that old detective instinct kick in, the one that had kept him alive through 2 decades of working missing persons and violent crimes, the one that told him when something was wrong, even if he could not yet articulate why. He closed his bike's saddlebag and moved a few steps closer, positioning himself where he could observe without being obvious. The woman was still on her phone, still pacing, still ignoring the girl completely. And then it happened again. The girl dropped her phone. This time, Jake was watching closely enough to see that it was not an accident. Her fingers opened deliberately, releasing the phone to fall. She bent down, picked it up, and as she straightened, her eyes found Jake. She held his gaze for just a fraction of a second, and in that brief moment, he saw it. Fear. Desperation. A silent plea. Then she looked away quickly, her face going blank again, her shoulders hunching slightly as if trying to make herself smaller. Jake's blood went cold. He had seen that look before, on the faces of children who were being hurt, controlled, trafficked, abused. It was the look of a child who knew she was in danger but had no way to ask for help without making things worse. He pulled out his phone and pretended to check messages while keeping his attention locked on the girl and the woman. The woman ended her call and turned toward the girl with an expression that was not warm or kind. It was impatient and irritated. She snapped something that Jake could not hear from his position, and the girl flinched. Not dramatically, just a small, instinctive recoil that suggested she expected to be hurt. The woman grabbed the girl's arm, her fingers digging in hard enough that Jake could see the girl wince, and started walking toward the entrance of the travel stop. The girl stumbled slightly, trying to keep up, and dropped her phone again. This time the woman did notice. She stopped, turned, and said something sharp. The girl bent down, picked up the phone with shaking hands, and clutched it tightly as the woman dragged her toward the building. Jake made his decision. He followed them inside, keeping a careful distance, moving like he was just another traveler stopping for coffee and a bathroom break. The travel stop was busy, filled with families and truckers and road trippers, the air thick with the smell of fried food and coffee and air conditioning running at full blast. The woman and girl headed toward the restrooms in the back, and Jake positioned himself near the coffee station where he had a clear line of sight. He pulled out his phone again and opened the Notes app, typing quickly. Girl approximately 10 years old, brown hair, purple hoodie, traveling with adult woman who shows no warmth or connection. Girl repeatedly dropped phone as apparent signal. Visible fear. Possible non-family abduction or custody violation. He saved the note, then opened his contacts and scrolled to the number for his former partner at Dallas PD, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, who now worked with the Texas Rangers on child exploitation cases. He texted her quickly, keeping his message brief. At Love's travel stop west of Amarillo on I-40. Possible situation with a minor, girl signaling distress, adult female claims to be family but behavior suggests otherwise. Silver SUV, New Mexico plates. Will send plate number if I can get it. Stay available. Carmen's response came back in less than 30 seconds. On it. Do not engage directly, observe and document. I'm looping in local PD and getting units to your location. Plate number critical. Jake slipped his phone into his pocket and moved toward the exit, walking casually past the silver SUV and memorizing the license plate. New Mexico commercial plate, recent registration sticker. He took a photo as discreetly as possible, angling his phone like he was checking directions, then sent it to Carmen with a brief message. Got it. They are inside now. Girl went to restroom with the woman. He leaned against his bike and waited, his heart pounding with the particular kind of adrenaline that came from knowing something terrible might be happening and not yet having enough evidence to stop it. He had been in this position dozens of times during his career, that agonizing space between suspicion and proof, where acting too soon could make things worse, but waiting too long could mean losing a victim entirely. Minutes crawled by. 5. Then 7. Jake kept his eyes on the entrance, tracking every person who came out, families with kids, truckers in worn jeans and company shirts, elderly couples moving slowly, but no woman in sunglasses and white blouse, no girl in a purple hoodie. His phone buzzed. Carmen, local PD dispatched, ETA 6 minutes. Plate comes back registered to a rental company out of Albuquerque. Rented 4 days ago to Amanda Kerrigan. Running her now. Stand by. Jake's jaw tightened. 4 days. If this was an abduction, the girl had been with this woman for 4 days, which meant she had been missing from somewhere for at least that long, which meant there were parents out there losing their minds with fear and grief. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep his body language relaxed, to look like just another biker taking a break. Then, the entrance doors opened and the woman emerged, moving quickly, the girl being pulled along beside her. The woman's face was tight with tension, her movements sharp and hurried, like someone who had just realized she needed to leave immediately. She scanned the parking lot with quick, jerky glances, and Jake had the distinct impression that she was looking for threats, for anyone paying too much attention. He turned slightly, pretending to adjust something on his bike, keeping his face angled away but his peripheral vision locked on them. The woman unlocked the SUV with a beep, opened the back door, and shoved the girl inside with more force than necessary. The girl stumbled into the seat, her phone falling onto the floor of the vehicle. She reached for it, but the woman slammed the door before she could retrieve it. Then, the woman got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and began backing out of the parking space. Jake did not hesitate. He swung onto his bike, fired the engine, and moved into position. Not blocking her directly, not creating a confrontation, but positioning himself in a way that made it very clear he was watching, that he was not going to let her disappear. The woman stopped the SUV, staring at him through the windshield. Jake stared back, his face calm but his eyes hard, and he deliberately pulled out his phone and held it up so she could see that he was dialing. Her expression shifted from irritation to alarm to calculation. She threw the SUV into drive and accelerated toward the exit, moving faster than was safe in a crowded parking lot. Jake followed, keeping a distance of about 30 feet, his phone pressed to his ear. The dispatcher answered immediately. "This is Jake Mercer, former Dallas PD detective. I'm at the Love's travel stop west of Amarillo on Interstate 40. I have eyes on a silver SUV, New Mexico plates," and he rattled off the number with a possible child abduction in progress. The vehicle is attempting to leave the lot now. "I have units already dispatched to your location," the dispatcher said, her voice sharp and professional. "Do not engage. Maintain visual contact if safe to do so. Units are 2 minutes out." The SUV hit the exit and turned west onto the service road, accelerating hard. Jake followed, his bike faster and more maneuverable, keeping her in sight but not crowding her. His phone was still connected to dispatch, and he narrated every turn, every move. "She is heading west on the service road toward the Interstate 40 on-ramp, speed approximately 50 in a 35 zone. No traffic violations beyond speed. She is driving erratically, swerving slightly. Possible panic." Behind him, he heard the wail of sirens. 2 Amarillo Police Department units screamed into the travel stop parking lot, lights blazing. One peeled off toward the service road, closing the distance fast. The woman saw the police car in her mirrors and her panic escalated. She swerved onto the Interstate 40 on-ramp, tires squealing, and merged into westbound traffic without checking her blind spot, cutting off a semi-truck that blasted its horn in protest. Jake stayed with her, weaving through traffic, his bike's engine roaring. The police unit was right behind him now, and ahead he could see 2 more units blocking the highway, creating a roadblock. The woman had nowhere to go. She hit the brakes hard, the SUV skidding slightly, then pulled onto the shoulder and stopped. Officers emerged with weapons drawn, commands sharp and clear. "Driver, turn off the engine. Show me your hands. Hands where I can see them." Jake stopped his bike 50 feet back, engine still running, ready to move if she tried to bolt again. The woman's door opened slowly and she stepped out, hands raised, her face a mask of indignant confusion. "Officer, I do not understand what is happening. I have not done anything wrong. I'm just trying to get my niece home to her mother." One officer kept her covered while his partner moved to the passenger side and opened the back door. The girl was sitting in the back seat, her face pale and tear-streaked, her arms wrapped around herself. The officer knelt down, his voice gentle. "Hey there, sweetheart. What is your name?" The girl's voice was so quiet that Jake could barely hear it from his position. Emma. Emma Caldwell. The officer's body language changed immediately. He stood, brought his radio to his mouth, and spoke quickly. Dispatch, I need you to run Emma Caldwell through NCIC Missing Persons Database immediately. The girl claims her name is Emma Caldwell. Within seconds, the response came back, loud enough that Jake could hear it through the officer's radio. Confirmed. Emma Caldwell, age 10, reported missing from Tulsa, Oklahoma, 4 days ago. Amber Alert active. Suspect description matches Amanda Kerrigan, maternal aunt, non-custodial. Warrant issued for custodial interference and kidnapping. The officer turned back to Emma, his voice soft and reassuring. Emma, you are safe now. We are going to get you back to your mom and dad. Everything is going to be okay. The girl started crying, not with fear anymore, but with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. She nodded, unable to speak, and the officer helped her out of the vehicle, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders even though the day was warm. Another officer was placing Amanda Kerrigan in handcuffs, reading her rights in a flat professional tone. The woman's indignant mask had cracked, revealing panic and desperation underneath. She tried to argue, tried to claim that she had every right to take her niece, that the girl's parents were unfit, that she was protecting Emma from a bad situation. But the officers were not listening. They secured her in the back of a patrol car and turned their attention to Emma, to making sure she was physically unharmed, to calling for victim services and notifying her parents in Tulsa. One of the officers, a sergeant with graying hair and kind eyes, approached Jake. He looked at the leather vest, the patches, the bike, and his expression was cautious but respectful. You are the one who called this in. Yes, sir. Jake Mercer, retired Dallas PD. 22 years on the job, most of it in missing persons. The sergeant's expression softened. You have good instincts. That girl was signaling, and you were the only one who saw it. Jake shook his head. She was trying to get anyone's attention. I just happened to be paying attention. The sergeant extended his hand. Well, today that made all the difference. Emma Caldwell has been missing for 4 days. Her parents have been out of their minds. If Kerrigan had made it across state lines into New Mexico or Arizona, if she had gotten Emma to wherever she was planning to take her, we might never have found her. You gave that little girl her life back. Jake shook the sergeant's hand, his throat tight. How is she? Scared, but physically unharmed. We are getting her checked out by paramedics, and then victim services will stay with her until her parents arrive. They are driving down from Tulsa now. Should be here in about 4 hours. The sergeant paused. Emma asked if she could talk to you. She said you were the one who saw her signals. She wants to thank you. Jake felt something crack open in his chest. He nodded, unable to speak, and followed the sergeant over to where Emma sat in the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, a paramedic checking her vitals while a victim advocate sat beside her, holding her hand. Emma looked up when Jake approached, and her face, pale and tear-stained, showed a flicker of recognition. You were the man on the motorcycle, the one who followed us. Jake knelt down so he was at her eye level. Yeah, sweetheart, that was me. Emma's eyes filled with tears again. I kept dropping my phone. I was trying to get someone to notice, but everyone just walked by. I thought no one was going to see. But you saw. You saw me. I saw you, Emma. You were very brave. You kept trying even when people were not noticing. That took a lot of courage. I was so scared, Emma whispered. My aunt, she said my mom was sick and needed me to come stay with her for a while. But when we got in the car, she would not let me call my mom. And she kept driving, and I realized that we were not going to my mom at all. I tried to tell people at other stops, but she would not let me out of her sight. So I started dropping my phone, hoping someone would see that something was wrong. You did exactly the right thing, Jake said gently. You trusted your instincts. You kept looking for help. And you found it. Emma wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie, her small hands still trembling. The victim advocate beside her squeezed her shoulder gently, offering quiet reassurance. Jake stayed kneeling at her eye level, his presence calm and steady, the kind of anchor a frightened child needed in the chaos of flashing lights and official procedures. The paramedic finished checking Emma's vitals and gave the advocate a small nod, indicating that physically the girl was unharmed. But Jake knew that the real damage was not always visible, that 4 days of being controlled and isolated by someone who was supposed to be family left wounds that would take time and care to heal. Emma looked at Jake with eyes that were older than they should have been, eyes that had seen fear and learned that not all adults could be trusted, but eyes that also held a flicker of hope because one stranger had chosen to pay attention when it mattered most. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said quietly. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything. Why did you believe me? Why did you know something was wrong when everyone else just walked by?" Jake thought about how to answer that, about all the years of training and experience, all the cases he had worked where children had tried to signal for help and been ignored, all the times he had arrived too late because no one had paid attention to the small signs that something was wrong. But he knew that was not what Emma needed to hear. So he told her the simple truth. Because you were brave enough to keep trying. Because you did not give up even when people were not noticing. And because I have learned that when children are trying to tell us something, we need to listen, even if they are not using words. You used your actions to speak, and I heard you. Emma nodded slowly, processing that, and then she said something that would stay with Jake for the rest of his life. "My mom always told me that if I was ever in trouble, I should look for a policeman or a firefighter or a mom with kids. But there were not any of those people at the rest stop. There was just you. And you looked kind of scary with all the leather and the big motorcycle. But I thought maybe someone who looked that strong might be able to help. And I was right." Jake felt his eyes burning. He reached out and gently touched the top of Emma's head, a gesture of benediction and protection. "You were right, Emma, and I want you to remember something. Sometimes the people who look the scariest on the outside are the ones who care the most about keeping kids safe. You trusted your instincts, and that was exactly the right thing to do." The victim advocate spoke up then, her voice gentle but firm. "Emma, we need to get you to the hospital for a full checkup, and then we will take you somewhere safe and comfortable to wait for your parents. But Mr. Mercer will be nearby if you need anything, all right?" Emma looked at Jake with sudden panic. "You are not leaving, are you?" "I will stay," Jake promised. "I will stay right here until your mom and dad arrive. I am not going anywhere." The relief on Emma's face was immediate and profound. She nodded, allowed the advocate to help her into a waiting ambulance, and as the vehicle pulled away with lights flashing but no siren, she pressed her face to the window and waved at Jake. He waved back, his throat too tight to speak, and watched until the ambulance disappeared down the highway. The sergeant approached again, this time with a detective from the Amarillo Police Department, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Linda Hayes. I need to get a full statement from you about what you observed and why you called it in. We are building the case against Kerrigan, and your testimony is going to be critical." Jake spent the next hour at the police station, walking Detective Hayes through every detail. The way Emma had stood too far from her aunt, the lack of warmth or connection between them, the repeated phone drops that were too deliberate to be accidents, the way Emma had scanned the parking lot looking for help, the fear in her eyes when she finally made contact with Jake. He described the woman's behavior, her impatience and control, the way she had grabbed Emma's arm hard enough to make the girl wince, the panic in her movements when she realized someone was watching. Detective Hayes took notes, asked clarifying questions, and at the end of the interview, she sat back in her chair and studied Jake with an expression that was part respect and part curiosity. You know, most people would have convinced themselves they were imagining things. They would have told themselves it was none of their business, or that they did not want to cause a scene, or that they might be wrong and would look foolish. But you trusted what you saw, and you acted on it. What made you willing to take that risk? Jake thought about that for a long moment before answering. Because I spent 22 years working cases where people saw something wrong and did not act on it. Where children tried to signal for help and adults looked away because it was easier, because they did not want to get involved, because they thought someone else would handle it. And I saw what happened to those kids when no one paid attention. So when I see a child trying to tell me something, I listen. Even if I am wrong, even if I cause a scene, even if I end up looking like a paranoid fool, I would rather be wrong and embarrassed than right and too late. Detective Hayes nodded slowly. Well, today you were right. And because you were willing to act, Emma Caldwell is going home to her parents instead of disappearing into whatever plan her aunt had for her." The detective paused, then added quietly, "We are still piecing together Kerrigan's motivations, but preliminary information suggests she has a history of mental health issues and became fixated on the idea that Emma's parents were not raising her correctly. She convinced herself she was rescuing Emma, that she was saving her from a bad situation. But Emma's parents are good people, stable and loving. This was not about protecting the child. This was about control and obsession. Jake felt sick. 4 days. Emma had been with someone who believed she was doing the right thing, which made her unpredictable and potentially more dangerous than a straightforward abductor. People who thought they were righteous rarely saw reason, rarely backed down, rarely let go willingly. If Kerrigan had made it to wherever she was headed, if she had gotten Emma into a situation where she felt cornered or threatened, there was no telling what might have happened. By the time Jake left the police station, it was after 6 in the evening. The September sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and amber. He rode back to the hospital where Emma was being evaluated, parked his bike in the visitor lot, and settled in to wait. He had promised Emma he would stay, and Jake Mercer was a man who kept his promises. He bought terrible coffee from a vending machine, sat on a bench outside the emergency room entrance, and called Carmen to give her a full update. She listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "Jake, you just broke open a custodial interference case that could have turned into something much worse. Emma is safe because you paid attention. Her parents are going to get their daughter back because you were willing to trust your gut and act on it. That matters. It matters more than you know." Jake rubbed his face, suddenly exhausted. "I just keep thinking about all the people who walked past her, all the families and truckers and travelers who saw a girl dropping her phone over and over and did not think twice about it. What if I had not been there? What if I had convinced myself I was imagining things?" Carmen's voice was firm. "But you were there, and you did not convince yourself of anything except that a child needed help. That is what makes the difference, Jake. One person willing to pay attention, one person willing to act. That is all it takes." 4 hours later, Jake was still sitting on that bench when a car pulled into the hospital parking lot with Oklahoma plates, moving fast but not recklessly, the kind of speed that came from desperation held barely in check. A man and woman jumped out before the engine had fully stopped, and even from a distance, Jake could see the exhaustion and terror etched into their faces. Emma's parents. They ran toward the emergency room entrance, and Jake stood, intercepting them gently. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell?" They stopped, startled, taking in his appearance with wide eyes. The man was in his late 30s, with brown hair and the same blue eyes as Emma. The woman was a few years younger, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking. "Yes," the man said, his voice hoarse. "We are Emma's parents. Is she okay? She is safe. She's inside. They are finishing up her medical evaluation, but she is physically unharmed." Jake paused. "I am Jake Mercer. I am the one who saw Emma's signals and called the police." The woman's face crumpled. She reached out and grabbed Jake's hand with both of hers, gripping so tightly it hurt. "You found her. You found our baby." Her voice broke into sobs. "We have been looking for 4 days, 4 days not knowing where she was, if she was hurt, if we would ever see her again. And you found her." Jake felt his own eyes burning. "Your daughter is incredibly brave. She kept trying to signal for help even when people were not noticing. She did not give up. She saved herself. I just paid attention." The man, Emma's father, was crying too. He extended his hand, and when Jake shook it, the man pulled him into a fierce hug. "Thank you. Thank you for seeing her. Thank you for not walking past. Thank you for bringing our daughter back to us." A nurse appeared at the entrance, smiling gently. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell? Emma is ready to see you." The couple did not wait for further invitation. They ran inside, and Jake followed at a distance, wanting to see the reunion, but not wanting to intrude on such a private moment. He stood in the hallway outside the examination room and watched through the open door as Emma saw her parents and let out a cry that was part relief, part joy, part release of 4 days of held terror. Her mother and father reached her at the same time, wrapping her in their arms, all three of them crying and holding each other with the kind of desperate intensity that came from believing you had lost everything and then being given it back. Emma's mother was sobbing into her daughter's hair, her hands running over Emma's face and arms as if checking that she was real, that she was whole. Emma's father had his arms around both of them, his face buried against Emma's shoulder, his whole body shaking. And Emma, small and brave and finally safe, clung to her parents and said the words that every parent who has lost a child dreams of hearing. "I knew you would find me. I knew you would come." Jake turned away, giving them privacy, and walked back outside into the Texas evening. The sky was deepening to purple now, stars beginning to emerge in the vast expanse overhead. He sat on the bench and let himself feel everything he had been holding back for the past 5 hours. The fear that he might have been wrong, the relief that he had been right, the gratitude that Emma was safe, the grief for all the children who had tried to signal for help and had not been seen. He pulled out his phone and texted his club brothers, letting them know he would not make it to Albuquerque tonight, that something had come up, that he would explain later. Then he just sat and breathed and let the weight of the day settle into his bones. 20 minutes later, Emma's parents came outside with their daughter between them, holding both their hands. Emma was wearing clean clothes that the hospital had provided, her hair brushed, her face scrubbed, but her eyes still carried the shadow of fear alongside the relief of being home. She saw Jake and pulled away from her parents, running over to him. He stood and she threw her arms around his waist, hugging him with all the strength her small body could manage. "Thank you for seeing me," she said into his vest. "Thank you for not walking away." Jake knelt down and hugged her back, this brave girl who had refused to give up, who had kept signaling even when it seemed hopeless, who had trusted that someone, somewhere, would pay attention. "You are going to be okay, Emma. You are safe now. You're going home." Emma's mother approached, her face still streaked with tears but showing the first signs of peace. "Mr. Mercer, we do not have words for what you did today. You gave us back our daughter. You gave Emma back her life. How do we thank someone for that?" "You do not need to thank me," Jake said. "You just hold her close and help her heal. That is all that matters." Emma's father stepped forward. "We would like to stay in touch if that's all right with you. Emma has been talking about you nonstop. She says you are the biker who saved her. We would like her to know that the person who helped her, when she needed it most, is not just a stranger, but someone who will always be part of her story." Jake felt his throat tighten. "I would be honored." Over the following months, Jake and the Caldwell family maintained contact. They exchanged messages, phone calls, updates on Emma's recovery. Emma's trauma from the abduction required therapy, but she healed with the resilience that children possess when they're surrounded by love and safety. She returned to school, rejoined her soccer team, reconnected with friends, but she also became an advocate in her own way, speaking at her school about trusting your instincts, about asking for help even when it is hard, about the importance of paying attention to people who might be in trouble. She created a project for her class about safety signals, about the small ways people try to communicate distress, and her teacher was so impressed that she invited Jake to come speak to the students about recognizing when someone needs help. Jake drove to Tulsa on a cold November morning, 6 weeks after the rescue, and stood in front of 30 fourth graders who looked at his leather vest and tattoos with wide eyes and endless curiosity. Emma introduced him, her voice steady and proud. "This is Mr. Jake. He is the person who saw me when I needed help. He is the reason I'm home." Jake talked to the children about awareness, about trusting that small voice inside that says something is wrong, about understanding that asking for help is not weakness but courage. He talked about the importance of being the kind of person who notices when someone is struggling, who does not walk past, who is willing to act even when it is uncomfortable. And he talked about Emma's bravery, about how she had kept trying to signal for help even when it seemed like no one was watching, and how that persistence had saved her life. After the presentation, a little boy raised his hand and asked a question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Mr. Jake, what if you had been wrong? What if Emma was not really in trouble and you made a big deal out of nothing? Would you have been embarrassed? Jake thought about that. About all the times in his career when he had trusted his instincts and been wrong, when he had investigated leads that went nowhere, when he had caused scenes that turned out to be misunderstandings. And he thought about the alternative, about the cases where people had seen something wrong and convinced themselves it was nothing, and children had paid the price. "I would rather be wrong and embarrassed 100 times," Jake said, "than be right once and too late. Because Emma's safety, any child's safety, is worth more than my pride." The children nodded solemnly, processing that, and Jake hoped that somewhere in that room was a future adult who would remember this lesson when they saw someone who needed help. The Caldwell family invited Jake to Emma's 11th birthday party 6 months after the rescue. It was a backyard celebration with balloons and cake and a dozen kids running around playing games. Emma wore a purple dress, her favorite color, and spent the afternoon laughing with her friends, looking for all the world like a normal, happy child. But when it was time to cut the cake, she asked everyone to gather around, and she made a small speech that left not a single dry eye in the yard. "I want to thank everyone for coming to celebrate with me. This year has been really hard. I went through something scary, and there were days when I did not think I would ever feel normal again. But my mom and dad and my therapist and all my friends have helped me heal. And I want to thank Mr. Jake, because he taught me that even when you feel alone, there are people watching who care. He taught me that asking for help works, that someone will answer if you keep trying." She turned to Jake, who was standing at the edge of the group, trying to stay unobtrusive. "Mr. Jake, you are my hero. Not just because you saved me, but because you showed me what it means to pay attention, to care about people even when it is hard, to be the kind of person who does not walk past someone who needs help. I want to be like that when I grow up." Jake could not speak. He just nodded, his vision blurred with tears, and Emma ran over and hugged him. Her parents joined in, and for a long moment they stood together in that backyard, bound by a connection that had been forged in crisis and strengthened through healing. The rest of the party continued with cake and presents and children's laughter, but Jake carried that moment with him, a reminder of why he had spent his life trying to protect people, why he continued to ride with his club doing charity work and community outreach, why he would always be the person who paid attention when something felt wrong. The story of Emma at the rest stop became part of Lone Star Brotherhood's identity. Jake shared it with his club brothers, and they used it to develop training programs about recognizing signs of distress, about the importance of trusting instincts, about being the kind of men who acted when action was needed. They distributed cards at their charity events with information about child safety, about what to do if you saw something suspicious, about resources for parents teaching their children how to signal for help in emergencies. Over the next 3 years, 4 different Lone Star Brotherhood members recognized and intervened in situations where children were in distress. 2 were custody violations similar to Emma's case. 1 was a teenager being coerced by an adult at a shopping mall. 1 was a child who had wandered away from a campground and gotten lost. Each time, someone paid attention. Each time, someone trusted their gut. Each time, someone was willing to risk being wrong in order to make sure a child was safe. Each time, a life was changed or saved. Jake kept one thing from that September afternoon at the rest stop, a photo that Emma's mother had sent him months later. It showed Emma sitting on Jake's motorcycle, wearing an oversized helmet and grinning with pure joy. On the back, Emma had written in careful child's handwriting, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for being my hero." The photo hung in Jake's workshop beside his bike, a reminder that heroism was not always dramatic or violent or cinematic. Sometimes it was just paying attention. Sometimes it was trusting that small voice that said something was wrong. Sometimes it was being willing to cause a scene, to follow a vehicle, to call the police, to risk looking foolish if it meant a child might be safe. When Emma turned 14, she wrote an essay for her English class about the experience. Her teacher was so moved that she submitted it to a statewide writing competition, and Emma won first place. The essay was titled "The Man Who Saw Me," and it described that September afternoon from her perspective, the terror of being taken by her aunt, the desperate attempts to signal for help, the moment when a stranger on a motorcycle looked at her and understood what no one else had seen. She ended the essay with words that would be quoted in newspapers and shared on social media, words that captured the heart of everything that had happened. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask a stranger for help, and sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is pay enough attention to see someone asking. We live in a world where everyone is busy, where people are focused on their own lives, where it is easy to walk past someone who needs help because we assume someone else will notice. But what if we all decided to be the person who notices? What if we all chose to pay attention, to trust our instincts, to act when something feels wrong? How many lives could we save? How many children could go home to their families? How many tragedies could we prevent? My hero did not wear a cape or a uniform. He wore leather and rode a motorcycle and looked kind of scary. But he was the person who saw me. He was the person who believed me. He was the person who acted. And because of him, I am home. Be that person. Notice. Trust your gut. Act. You might just save a life. Jake was in the audience when Emma read that essay at the award ceremony, and when she finished and looked at him with gratitude and pride, he understood that this was why he had spent his life the way he had. Not for recognition or awards or headlines, but for moments like this, where a child who had been lost was found, where someone who had felt invisible was seen, where one person paying attention made all the difference between tragedy and rescue. If this story has reminded you that children in distress are often trying desperately to signal for help in ways that require us to truly see them, that trusting your instincts when something feels wrong can save lives, and that being willing to act, even when it is uncomfortable or risky, is the difference between horror and hope, then let it change how you move through the world. Pay attention in public spaces. Trust that small voice that says something is not right. Be willing to cause a scene if a child might need help. Because Emma Caldwell went home to her family because one person noticed, one person believed, one person acted, and that is all it takes to transform a nightmare into a rescue, to give parents back their child, to show a frightened kid that someone is watching, someone cares, and someone will help. Your awareness matters because predators and those who would harm children count on bystanders looking away, on people being too busy or too worried about being wrong to act. Every person willing to pay attention, to trust their instincts, and to be the one who speaks up becomes part of the solution that brings children home.